Hey there, welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, today we are going to set up our backend project, where we will try to install all of the dependencies and creating all of the project structure and all. And we will spin the backend project so we can kickstart our coding from here. So first of all, let's try to install Node.js, right? If you have not installed Node.js in your computer, then make sure like you are always going to be install at least minimum version of the 20. So in this case, I have already installed Node.js in my previous lecture where we have set up our front-end project. So in this case, still you can check it out, just like node-b, which is going to give you the installed version of your Node.js in your machine. So in our case, we're going to use Yarn. So Yarn is a kind of package manager, just like npm package manager does. But Yarn it's built by Meta, that's formerly from the Facebook, and it is quite faster than npm. So in our course, we're going to use Yarn throughout of the whole application. So let's try to create our project. What we're going to do, let's try to create one directory. This directory will be mkdir. We can say, let's say departmental store. Now let's go back to departmental store directory. And here, we're going to init our project. So in this case, we can say yarn init, right? Then we can give a name of the project. So in this case, we are good to go with the departmental store. Then version is perfectly fine. Then description, you can put a description right here. Entry point will be we'll keep the index.js for a while. It's perfectly fine. Repository URL we are not going to define for a while because we will be creating a repository in our one of the lecture, but it's going to be too early for a while. Now let's go ahead and author. Maybe you can just keep your name. So in this case, we are going to say code with J, right? Then license is perfectly fine. Private, it's perfectly fine. So finally, the project is created. So if you go ahead and check it out, let's say ls, right? So ls for listing all of the files and directories. So you can see right now we have only one file. And if you see the file, it's called cat package.json file. You can see like inside this package.json file, we don't have anything, all right? It's just like configuration of our project. So version and all of the entry point of the file, like a whole project, etc. So what we're going to do, we are going to install a couple of libraries right here, right? We are going to use the Fastify for our backend project. So let's try to install Fastify. So then we are going to say yarn add Fastify. Fastify, right? Fastify. All right. Then one more library we are going to install because we are going to accommodate our databases and everything from PostgreSQL. So let's try to install PG. So let's try to add Postgres also. PG. Perfect. There are a couple of more libraries we need to install, which is going to help us out to work efficiently in our development environment. So first thing, we need to install yarn add .env and nodemon will be one kind of, like, you can say it's a kind of tool or library which is going to monitoring our application changes, and it is going to help us out to live reload, or maybe you can say hot reload of our backend services. And those are the things we're going to install as a kind of dev dependencies. Let's try to install once again, maybe one by one. Perfect. Then we can say yarn nodemon. Perfect. So now what we need to do, as you can see right now, we have successfully set up our project. But here are a couple of directories we need to create. If you see the project structure right now, we don't have anything, right? So let's try to create a couple of directories right here. So in this case, what we are going to do, we're going to create one directory that is called mkdir src. This will be our root directory of the project, right? So if you see here, inside this departmental store and directory, like this is our whole application directory. Inside this directory, we will be going to have the source, where we will keep our application source file. Perfect. So now you can see we have our source directory. So here in the source directory, we are going to keep all of the source file inside this source directory. So that means if we're going to write the code, then we will be going to keep inside the source. Then outside the source, we will be going to keep all of the configurations related to this project. As an example, some of the image file, just like in a Docker or infrastructure or some of the backup file, which is going to help us out to spin our project, right, in CI/CD or in our local environment. But right now, let's try to focus on the src directory. Let's go back to the source directory, src. So now I'm inside the source directory. Here, inside the source directory, we're going to create a couple of directories more, right? So for a while, these are the directories we're going to create inside this source directory. Now you can see, like, inside the source directory, we have all of these things together. So now we have all the directories. So somehow we need to open this project in one kind of like integrated development environment. So while it comes to IDE, then definitely what we need to do, we need to install one of the IDE in our machine. So in our case, we're going to use the Visual Studio Code, but as per your preference, you can select other type of IDE as well, as where there are wide range of the IDEs are available in the internet. So you can just go for WebStorm. This is going to be very useful, or maybe kind of, you can say, professional IDE for web development or maybe backend development. And definitely, like, this WebStorm JetBrains, it is not for free. And if you're a student or a teacher, then you can get it for free using your college or university ID. And you can use the Atom also. This is purely like it's a free IDE, and it's really very useful. I'm often using this one also. And otherwise, you can use for the Sublime Text. So Sublime Text is really very wonderful IDE for Node.js or maybe React or this kind of development. In our case, we're going to use Visual Studio Code, so which is really very wonderful IDE, and especially for Node.js development, I'm always going to recommend use Visual Studio Code for your project. So now let's go ahead here. In our case, I'm gonna open in this whole project in Visual Studio Code. I have already set these things in my terminal. It's called VSC dot. If I'm gonna put right here, then this whole project, it will be open in Visual Studio Code. Perfect. So now you can see our project is open in our Visual Studio Code. So this is our project structure. Inside the source directory, we have controller, DB, models, repository, routes, service, and utils, right? And we have package.json file where we kept all of the dependencies, which is going to be required for our application. And these are some of the dev dependencies, which is going to use for our development environment. In terms of like, this is not going to be required once we are going to build our application, that's not going to be required anymore. There is one more dependencies we need to install right here. Let's try to install it quickly, which is going to support our Fastify to used plugins. So in this case, yarn Fastify plugin, right? So now we have installed all of the dependencies. Now let's try to remove all of the caret symbols here. So by removing the caret symbol, we are saying to Node.js, use this pin version of the library, right? So which is going to be potentially used in our application. So if you are going to keep this caret symbol, that means like this is a kind of representation of SEMVAR, you can say semantic version, right? And which means we need approximately 5.0.1 or greater than 5.0.1 or similar, something like that, but not 6.0, right? So whatever the minor versions it's going to be available, right? So those are all of the versions is going to be installed right there if you are going to keep this caret symbol. So which is potentially sometimes it's breaking in our production environment. So you can imagine we have added some code right here, which is going to be potentially, maybe we have handled for 5.2.2, and tomorrow maybe there is a kind of new version is just that came up. As an example, 5.2.5. During that time of the development or maybe the production, like in a build, right? So while you are going to make your application in production, then it's going to install the available version right after this one, right? But right after maybe 5.2, instead of 5.2, it's going to be 5.3, let's say. Then if there are significant changes are there, then our application is going to be stop working. So to get rid of all of these issues, that's why we are going to use like pin version. So if any version update is going to be needed, then what we're going to do, we will be going to do it by our own, right? We're not going to say to the Node.js, don't use any kind of version rather than this one, right? So this is really very good practice while it comes to making your application in the production. So it's not going to break your application on production while you are releasing something. Perfect. So now we are ready from our this side, but one thing still we are missing right here. So somehow we need to spin our application. Perfect. So now let's try to spin our application. But for spinning the application, we need to run a command. Then how we can run the command in Node.js? So while it comes to run the command on Node.js, then inside this package.json file, we need to add some scripts. So let's try to add some scripts right here. This is going to be a scripts. right? And scripts will be a kind of object here. And inside this object, we'll be going to add those commands. So initially we are going to say def. And while we are going to run the def, then it will execute the nodemon. You can say nodemon, right? Then we are going to provide the path of our entry file, which is potentially inside the src directory, index.js. Perfect. So here, in this monolithic application, we're going to write all of the codes using JavaScript. And we're going to write on the TypeScript, as well as if you're taking this course on from our bootcamp course, then definitely you will get all of the stuff also, where we are going to break it down, this monolithic application, from converting all of these things to JavaScript to TypeScript and breaking down this monolithic application to microservices. But in the normal full stack course, if you're watching this one, then definitely you will only get the access of the JavaScript part and monolithic application part only. All right, so in this course, we're going to write a lot of JavaScript codes. Right, so in the later stage, definitely we are going to write TypeScript as well as, but most of the times we are going to write JavaScript. So you might have thinking why we are using JavaScript right here in the first place. Maybe you know TypeScript, some of you very well, but you can imagine some of the viewer are not aware about the JavaScript also, right? Or it's not all about the language, it's all about the framework, right? So let's try to be comfortable with the framework. Then in the later stage, maybe you by yourself, you can convert all of these things to TypeScript very quickly. So here inside the source directory, I'm going to create one file. This is going to be index.js, right? All right, so here we are going to write a couple of codes, but right before writing the codes, let's try to enable our whole project for ES6 syntax. So where we can fairly get the benefit of the import and export and all of the stuff, right? So let's go to our package.json file. So here, right after these licenses, what we can do, we can just use the type as a module, right? So which is going to help us out to use the import keyword and a lot of flexibility it will going to give us, right? So in this index.js file, let's try to write a couple of codes here. So what we are going to do, we'll be going to import our Fastify here. So import Fastify from Fastify, right? Now let's try to create one Fastify instance right here. This is going to be const Fastify will be Fastify. And while we are going to create the Fastify instance, then we are going to say logger will be true, because we need to keep track of our requests and responses, right? So let's try to do that. Logger will be true. Perfect. So now since our Fastify is right here, then let's try to kickstart our application. So in this case, what we can say const start will be async. Then inside this async, what we are going to do, we are going to write a couple of lines of code here. This is going to be try catch inside the try catch. Fastify listen port number 3000. So in this case, we're not going to use the port 3000. So we can say port 9000. Right. Then as soon as we are going to start our server, then our we should supposed to see these logs right here, and it will going to serve our backend service in port 9000. So let's try to kickstart our application. So now our Fastify is ready to spin. So now let's try to accommodate a couple of endpoints, maybe root endpoints or health checker endpoints. We can add it right here. In this case, we can say, yeah, this is health check. Perfect. So these are the two endpoints we are going to access. Like if we are going to visit this root endpoint, then we should supposed to see hello world. And if we visit this health check, right, then we should supposed to see status is okay. So now let's try to spin our application. To spin the application, let's go to our console, right? So here we are going to say yarn dev, right? That is the script we have added in our package.json file. You can see this one, right? So now you can see our application is running, right? So it is running on spinning on port 9000. So now let's try to make a couple of calls from here. At least we can try to hit the root directory, root API endpoints, and maybe we can just like call /health. It should have to return these are the two status, right? So in this case, what we can do, we can make directly the HTTP calls from the Visual Studio Code also. So in this case, you need to install one plugin. This is going to be called REST client. So if you install the REST client, then you can just like, create one file, just like here, go here, and we can say request.http, right? With HTTP extension. So we can say get, and we need to provide this URL. We can provide http:// localhost 9,000, let's say, right? And we can accept the application session. That's perfectly fine. Then another one, we can say localhost, get localhost 9,000. You can say health, right? And accept application session. That's perfectly fine. So now we can send this request from here. Let's try to send this request. You can see instantly we are receiving the request, right? But here also we need to do one thing, like we need to segregate these things. So then only our request.http, like, HTTP client can recognize this is a kind of like separate request right here. So now let's try to call this one as well. As you can see, it says status okay. Perfect. So now we perfectly able to call our service from here. All right. So at least we are getting some kind of response from Fastify. But that's not enough, right? So we need to write a lot of codes here. So now let's try to close the server here. Let's try to close this window as well as this one as well as, right? Perfect. So now since it is working, right? So let's try to delete all of these things from here. So now what we're going to do, we're going to onboard a couple of files. So first of all, let's try to go to controller, and here we're going to create one file. This is going to be our user.controller.js, right? So here inside this user controller, we're going to create one function. This is going to help us out to create our user. So in this case, export const, we can say create user, right? And this will be going to be our request and replay, right? So we'll be coming back what exactly the request and replay is does in our Fastify. But let's try to accommodate at least bare minimum codes where we can at least spin our first initial step of our application, right? So in this case, let's try to capture all of this request stuff, whatever we are going to capture from our user. As an example, we'll be going to accept our name, our email address, or name, email address, and password, let's say, right? So that is like we can say. Perfect. Then this is the same thing we are giving back to our response as a response. But here, what we are going to do, we'll be going to perform some business logic and store the data. Data in database, right? So these are the two things we are going to do. This one will be going to be right here, right? And before that also we need to do validate the request body. So these are the things we are going to do right here in the create user. But as of now, this is perfectly enough for us. Our controller going to handle all of these things. It will going to perform the business logic behind the scene, and it will going to store the data in the database, and finally it is going to be return the data to our client. So now let's go back to our routes, right? So in the routes, inside the routes also, we will be going to create one file. So here inside the routes, also we're going to create one file. This is going to be our user routes.js. Cool. So here inside this user routes.js, let's try to import our user controller. So in this case, we can say import star as user controller. From, we can say controller, then user controller.js. Okay. So while we are using ES6, right? So just because of this one, you can say the type module. So this is the way we can import everything right here. But the downside is like we need to use the JS extension also while we are going to use any kind of like file throughout of our project, right? So that is not the case in the TypeScript. TypeScript is smart enough to detect that particular type extension. So that's why in the TypeScript it's not required. But in the ES6, definitely we need to use like this way. But while it comes to the library, then we no need to mention any kind of like the file extension. If you see here in the index.js file, we are using Fastify. We are not using any kind of Fastify.js or something like that, right? So this is pretty common. In this way, we can import the module. But while it comes to utilize any kind of file or import any kind of file, then we need to provide the complete file extension as well. So now let's try to create our user routes here. So in this case, we can say const user routes will be our async, and we can say Fastify and options, right? So these are the stuff we are going to discuss very quickly, but as of now we will just like accommodate whatever it is needed for a while. And because anyway in the upcoming episode we are going to deep dive on the Fastify each and every bit of all of these components, then you'll be going to get a better understanding of why we are using Fastify here, how option is going to work, and what kind of like advantages, how we can use the plugins and middlewares. All of these things we are going to cover together, right? So now let's try to accommodate our routes here. This is going to be, you can say Fastify dot post, right? And you can say Fastify dot post. You can say the endpoint will be our users, right? Then we can directly use this controller. Let's say user controller. Then we can say create user. You can see, like as soon as we are giving the dot notation, we can access that particular function from here. Right. Then finally, we're going to export default user routes. Cool. So now we have completely this one exactly. It's coming from here. I think let's try to remove this one. It's not required here. Here in the index.js file, let's try to import our routes here. So this is going to be import user routes from, you can say routes.userroutes.js. Perfect. So now let's try to use this one in Fastify. You can say register routes. Now we're going to register our user routes. So in this case, we can say user routes Fastify. Perfect. So now you can see our user routes is right here, right? So where we can directly register our user. So let's try to spin our application right now. In this case, yarn dev. Cool, our application is spinning. Now let's go to our request.http. So here what we're going to do, we'll be going to open one more request. This is going to be right now post. We can say http 9000, but this time we can say users and users. Then we can say content type will be application.json. Then here we're going to post our data. The first data will be our, so what are the data we have accept right here? You can see we are accepting the name, email, and password. So here we are going to say name will be John Doe, then maybe email will be test john.com, then password will be very simple password, right? Perfect. So now let's try to send a request. If everything goes well, then what we will be going to get, we'll be going to get the same object back return, and along with the ID as a kind of date. So let's try to send a request. We are getting the ID as a kind of timestamp, and we're getting all of these things return it back. So where these things are coming from? If you see here in the user controller, we are returning all of these things from here itself, right? Perfect. So this is a kind of quite a cool beginning. So what we're going to do, we're going to add a couple of more stuff right here. We're going to add database connection, models, repository, and routes, and everything we're going to add, along with our business logic as well as. Perfect. So now you can see our initial project is getting started. And in the next lecture, we'll be going to have a look what are the prerequisites we need to install in our computer and what are the things we need to set up additionally in this project. All right, then see you right there. Thank you.